the thing about stories is that there's this idea about authorship, that there's a true story out there, some sort of objective facts of what really happened, when in fact, this is a pretend world. This is a made-up story. And even in real life, it's really hard to pin down what is an objective truth. So maybe an unreliable narrator isn't telling a more reliable story, but maybe a more realistic story. On one level, any character is just trying to survive. And on a slightly deeper level, they're trying to stay alive. And then one level past that is they're trying to stay the same. So if you have a character that's, just like we're human, we like stasis, right? So if I started throwing bananas and apples at you, you probably would do this because you don't want me to mess up your face, right? You don't want to have new pain. I mean, whatever. We protect ourselves from whatever life throws at us. And so as a fiction writer, I invent the life that's getting thrown, as well as the character and how the character responds. And hopefully, I always prefer a story to be about a transformation. So I have to think, okay, like, what would actually get this character to change, to have a new idea, to see things differently, to make an unexpected decision? And that's what builds an interesting story for me. I think it's maybe something that, as a reader, seems really random, but I'm not fully in control of the stories that come to me. Like, usually they'll begin and I'll know just a few things, like a few elements of the opening paragraph. And it's almost like through trial and error that I come to discover what world I'm in, what story I'm telling. It's like it exists before me and I'm just trying to get it right. And I definitely didn't come up with it. I'm just deducing it. I think when you're fashioning a fictional world and a fictional sensibility, you sort of have to create your own language. So I mean, in some ways, I think of it as like vocabulary lists. And there's actually really good examples of this in McGlue, where he's sort of pairing words with one another in ways that build, I don't know if it's really poetic, but at least in the English version, conjures some new feeling. And, another example of this could be like the names of medications in My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Like, they're sort of inspiring, but you can't really say exactly why. That's kind of what I endeavor to do when I'm describing the objects on a desk or, what someone's wearing. Yeah, they're thoughtful, and some of these decisions are very, very practical ones. But it's also sort of just like the design of the reality that we're in and what those choices make you feel. And it's very hard to describe those things, in my experience, without using objects and colors and the combination of things together. I mean, I always find that interesting, how we lie to ourselves. Because then in a way, like when we lie to ourselves, we're writing a new story. So I also like the idea of deterioration, and that you can start with a character like McGlue. All right, from the beginning, he's maybe not quite normal. But over the course of the book, he becomes more and more damaged mentally, so that his thoughts and feelings are less and less linear. And yet somehow he arrives at some kind of truth. Maybe the truth that he finds despite himself. I think they have something else in common first, and that's that they're not really housed in a safe structure. You know, like, it's a lot about the parents and like what your parents reflect, what they show you about themselves, what you choose to take on, how you get what you need from these people. I mean, it's all very complicated. So I would say that's sort of the answer. I think, this says a lot about me, but a character that's just perfectly comfortable and safe isn't a very exciting one to throw into a fiction. I mean, there needs to be some danger, some turmoil, a problem. Yeah, I think it's a spiritual gesture that I feel like I needed to make. So in two different ways. In my year of rest and relaxation, it was taking something that, in my experience of observing it, was terrifying, and then describing it in an opposite way. As, I think the narrator says that Riva is jumping into a summer lake or something like that. And that was, I reserve some room to not have to decode or analyze things, especially at the endings of books, because I think those are the most moving moments of a book. But there is that gesture, a very similar gesture at the end of Lapvona, which is, I think, way more intense, actually, because instead of, planes crashing into a building, it's somebody's brother. I don't write historical fiction, Don't ask me what was happening in American history in 1851. I don't know. We were on the brink of the Civil War, maybe, I'm not a scholar, and I very deliberately try to occlude that area of my wisdom because it can kind of get into your head and ruin the dream of a novel. There's the urban stories, and then there's the, rural or suburban stories. And I mean, all of that, for me, is really based on my own references. Like growing up, I grew up right outside of a city in the Northeast US, and my idea of New York was like, oh, that's like Mecca. And I had never been to New York, but I had this idea, and it was because I watched TV and read books and watched movies and, looked at magazines. And this is the mythos of this place, This is the future. It's also the past. It's what defines life. And come to find out, I moved to New York when I was 17. I lived there for like 10 years. It thinks that of itself. Like, the city itself has an ego, right? And it's sort of self-fulfilling because there are people who can live their entire lives, never leave New York City. And it's kind of amazing. It's also a city that's really hard to leave. And I left New York, I think, in 2009. And the idea of moving back is like moving to Mars, It's just so, the world that I remembered / discovered outside of New York as an adult is really pretty interesting. I myself am very obsessed with control and having, I both want to be totally free and have no one controlling me. And then I also want to have total control over myself at the same time. And as a writer, I have to allow for both, because I need to have the inspiration and the new novel, crazy notion that's going to push me to understand the story better. And I also need to be disciplined and rigorous in how I'm writing.